how, if you are struggling with fatigue, because I think one of the things is exercise, we read a lot of things about, oh, if you exercise, your fatigue will get better. But you go out and exercise and then you come home and you feel really tired, especially if you haven't done any exercise in the past. How can we sort of go at this with some strategies in order for fatigue actually to be able to improve?
I think that's such a good question, and I think it can be really disheartening actually if you're struggling with fatigue, which we know is physical and emotional, isn't it? So it can be hard enough to say, right, I'm just going to make myself do this thing, and then your body's saying, I don't want to do it, and you're trying to do it anyway, and then afterwards you're exhausted. But then actually maybe it drops you backwards for a couple of weeks as well. And that was my experience in trying to, I was reading, I'm a researcher, I was reading all this stuff about how exercise is the way to best manage fatigue. And every time I tried, I was being almost kind of laid low for 2-3 weeks afterwards. And I was getting so frustrated because why was the research showing this for everyone else and not for me? And I learned the hard way for myself, and it will be different for every person, but I learned that I needed to build up really, really, really slowly. So you read exercise is good for fatigue and you think, right, that means something like a really brisk walk for a decent amount of time, or going to the gym, or you think high level of physical exertion, don't you?
Yeah.
And actually, I think the word exercise is really unhelpful, because if you are struggling with fatigue or mobility or just general impetus to want to do something, exercise doesn't feel tangible. It doesn't feel manageable. But there's also physical activity, which is a lovely word, which encompasses everything from, standing on one leg at a traffic light to try and manage some balance, all the way through to dancing in the kitchen with your kids in the evening. And then movement, which is one of my favorite words, which just implies trying to use your body more, bending down to pick something up, or maybe trying to carry your groceries a little bit further or something. And again, all of these are tailorable to your own functional ability and your own preferences. But I think for me, thinking about fatigue and exercise, we just need to broaden that out a lot more to fatigue and movement and physical activity, and just doing a little bit of something. And that something might look different for every person when they're starting. I interviewed a lovely lady called Joanne the other week with MS, and she does this thing called Walk a Happy Mile. And there's a YouTube video of it. And she does it regularly, but she does it in her lounge because she doesn't feel confident going out, and her balance is bad. So she does it holding on to something. And at the moment, she doesn't do the whole mile. She can't manage the mile. It's too fatiguing for her. But she does as much of it as she can on that given day, and she keeps coming back to it. And her goal, sorry, that's my dog coughing. And her goal is to be able to complete the whole mile on a good day, knowing that actually that might be on a Tuesday she completes it one day, and then by the Friday she doesn't complete it again. And so I think it's picking something that you enjoy, so that even if you only manage a bit, you're still benefiting from it mood wise. Picking something that it doesn't matter how much of it you manage. So maybe one day you walk 5 meters, maybe another day you go for 20 minutes, maybe one day you can walk briskly for an hour. But if you enjoy walking outside in the sunshine, it doesn't matter which one of those things it is. I think it's listening to your body. And if you're starting to experience more fatigue as the movement is going on rather than less, it might be time to go home again. And I think also just taking time and being okay with it. Not, you're not going to move better for 2 days and then your fatigue is under control. I think it's taken me 3 years of just slowly bringing in more and more movement and physical activity, and now I would say exercise as well, but it's been a building up process. And 3 years now, I can say that I feel that most of the time I manage my fatigue with movement. But it isn't do this now and then it's better. And I think sometimes if you're comparing fatigue to medication, and even though we know studies have shown that actually the efficacy of the medication, when you compare it to studies that show efficacy of exercise, it's much lower. But you maybe think you take that piece of medicine, and if it sits well with you, you do feel an impact quite quickly. Whereas when we're talking about something like exercise or physical activity, it's much more that long game. And I think there's no reason why you can't do both, why you can't take some medication to help manage your fatigue, to give you enough energy that you can start to do some exercise or some activity. And then maybe over time, the weighting of those changes, maybe it's more exercise than medication, or maybe you can take away that medication eventually. But it doesn't have to be one or the other. And it doesn't have to be the same thing for everyone. And it definitely doesn't have to be the same thing every day, I would say.
And I think it's really important what you were saying, that it does take time, because I think, you know, if you go on, I don't know, Instagram, and you scroll through feeds and you look at some of these people that like to hashtag them with MS Warrior, you know, they're doing this and they're climbing this, and you kind of feel like, wow, why can't I do that? Because this is never going to be me. But I mean, I used to be a total couch potato. I was, you know, pre-diagnosis, just sat and watched TV was my favorite pastime. I just did not do anything like that. And it was a friend of mine that wanted to do a couch to 5K. I'd never run. I was just like almost laughing at her. And then that, just like the idea of running for 30 seconds was really horrible. But I think by the end of the program, where we actually were jogging and doing things, that's when I suddenly realized, hang on a second, I have much more energy. And I mean, that's a good sort of 3 months worth of doing it before I actually noticed anything. And it was just like a happy side byproduct that I hadn't expected it, because I was fully sure that once I've completed that 5K, I wasn't going to run anymore. Yeah, that was going to be it. But I'm still doing it just purely because that worked. And that, bringing back to what you were saying, is like, for me, feeling like I'm investing into to my future. And now it's become longer than 5Ks, and I'm still really enjoying it most days. But some days it's really, really hard, and then you have to go back and sit on the sofa for a bit instead, and that's okay.
And I think it's also okay that some days you don't really want to. Some days you wake up and you're like, oh, I don't really feel like this. And I think that's when that realization that when you do it, you feel better kicks in. For me, the only time I have in my day to go for a decent walk is at 7 o'clock in the morning, before my kids are really kind of excited to be doing things. And getting out of bed at that time, if you have had a bad night's sleep or if your fatigue is high, it feels almost insurmountable. But I always know that no matter how hard it is, not going will make the rest of the day that much harder. Whereas if I can push myself through that really hard bit, by the time I come back from my walk, I feel like a better version of myself. I'm a better parent. I work better when I'm working. And it is that kind of, sometimes you do have to have a little battle with yourself. And it helps to have had some good experiences in order to have that battle, doesn't it?
Yeah, definitely. I feel like that's finding that level of pushing, but not pushing too much. It's really tricky, and it probably takes a good few years before you kind of get to know your body well enough when it comes to things like movement. Because I'm very much like that. If I don't do some sort of exercise in the morning, and that could be just stretching on some days, you know, it doesn't always have to be sort of something that's really like a run or lifting stuff. But if I don't do anything, I tend to just want to sit the rest of the day, and my fatigue is so bad by the time of lunch, I want to sleep, you know, and so I try to kind of think about that when I'm laying there in bed going, I don't want to get up, and I'm like, well, then I'm going to just stay like this the whole day, and I actually have stuff to get on with. So, but it's hard to find that motivation.